Hi, I'm Sarah Byers. Welcome to the Niagara Falls History Museum and our behind the scenes collections touch tour. So this is the virtual version of our touch tours that we do on a regular basis here at the museum, and that's when small groups come in and we tour the staff only rooms and we go into the collection storage and have some free time to look around, and we also bring out some artifacts to actually handle and touch, and we tell stories and exchange ideas and information, and it's a learning experience for everybody. I really enjoy it, so I'm glad to be able to bring that to you again tonight. So this is one of 3 of the City of Niagara Falls museums. We also run the Battleground Hotel Museum that's just up the lane, at the top of Lundy's Lane, and that's an 1850s tavern that's located on the Lundy's Lane battlefield. And we also operate the Willoughby Historical Museum, that is the rural history of Niagara Falls, Old Willoughby Township, and that's located on the Niagara Parkway just south of Chippewa. So this site, the Niagara Falls History Museum, we are in the old Stamford Township Hall that was built in 1874. And we're located on the traditional shared lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinootan people. The Chinootan people have called these lands home for thousands of years, and more recently the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee have been sharing the land as one dish, one spoon treaty territory. So first I'll tell you a little bit about the artifacts journey into the museum collection, and that starts here in this room. So first spot on our behind the scenes tour is the collections workroom, and it's also my office. So my camera right here is set up in my office space, and then behind me is the rest of the collections workroom, which is a shared space for anything and everything related to the collections, taking care of the collections, processing the collections, getting things ready for exhibition. So you can see a lot going on behind me. We have the James Morden collection being photographed over on this side, so that's a volunteer project. If you're a volunteer and you're working on collections here at the museum, then it's most likely that you're going to be working in this room. So Sabrina, hopefully soon she can come back and start working on that photographing project again. So it's photographing artifacts that have never been photographed before, so that we can get those artifacts out into the world. And help researchers, and they can help us in gaining more of the story of that collection, which it numbers in the thousands of artifacts that are Indigenous artifacts found throughout the Great Lakes and the Niagara region, stone, bone, antler tools and things. Over on this side we have some signage getting prepared for the museum's reopening, so some directional signage, all of the things that we need to keep safe while we return to the building and do our slow opening. And then we have a lot of storage and work table space for things that we need to help conserve the artifacts and prepare them for exhibition. We have things for matting and framing, for encapsulating artifacts to protect them. And then the big table in the center there works really well for our our accession committee meetings. And so the function of that is when artifacts come into the museum, when people donate artifacts, we gather once a month, if it's not COVID times, and we lay everything out, and we've done our research ahead of time, and we examine the artifacts, potential artifacts, and review the stories and talk about it as a committee to decide what comes into the collection and what does not. So this is the collection storage room. It's also called the repository, and it's where artifacts are stored for their preservation. So 3 things that people usually notice when they come into this room is secure storage. So I use my swipe card to hold it up to the door. You hear a beep and a click, and the door is open. So this room is always locked, and only certain people have access to this room for the safety of the artifact collections. Another thing is the lights. So lights are always off in this room. So the first thing I do when I come in is turn on the lights so I can see where I'm going and we can see all the artifacts. And light is damaging to artifacts. It can fade them out, and so we want to prevent that from happening. And the third thing that people notice is the feel of the room. So it's a little on the cool side. It has moderate humidity. And so that's to control things like mold and insects. Those things like to eat artifacts, so we want to prevent that from happening. And maybe most importantly, we want to prevent fluctuations of that. So we want to keep our temperature and humidity pretty even all of the time to prevent artifacts expanding and contracting and falling apart. And so you know how drastically humidity can change your hair. That's a very visible thing and something that you can feel. So your hair gets frizzy if it's too humid, and that's something that fluctuates all the time in the natural environment, and that's what we want to control here. So you can imagine how harsh that would be on our artifacts if they were going through those same changes in environment all the time. So just a curatorial detail about going through this room and handling artifacts when we get to that point. The reason that I am wearing this lab coat and why we use things like gloves all the time in museums, not just cotton gloves, but also the vinyl gloves, is for our protection as well as the artifacts protection. So we want to protect artifacts from the oils on our skin and dirt and things like that, but we need to protect ourselves as individuals from things like Skipper the dog over here. This is half of Skipper. Skipper was Thomas Barnett's pet dog who used to follow him around Niagara Falls when he was running errands. Thomas Barnett was the establisher of the Niagara Falls Museum down on River Road. So this was in the mid-1800s, and he was into taxidermy. That was part of his job as a museum curator back in the day. And at that time, they used some not so nice things like arsenic to preserve specimens for the museum. And just like these birds over here in the glass case, we're not going to open that and find out what those are preserved with. We can kind of predict that, and so we wear appropriate clothing, and we'll wear a mask if we need to, gloves, lab coats, all the things that we need to keep artifacts safe and to keep us safe as well. on the Lundy's Lane battlefield, so we get a lot of these things, and they are difficult to store because they are very big and heavy and rolly. So this has been a little bit of a solution in the meantime until we find something a bit more appropriate. So, you know, battlefields are messy things, and people find stuff all the time. The battlefield of Lundy's Lane is mostly built on, but people, you know, they keep finding things. If you dig a garden and your house is on the battlefield of Lundy's Lane, you're likely to find something. It might be something this big, or it might be a little musket ball, or a bit of somebody's uniform, soldier's uniform, or something they carried in their pocket. But yeah, that is the reality of conflict, that it leaves a lot of, you know, debris. So here's a cool thing. This is something that I have to put away. This was a very recent project that we just got finished, or our partners just got finished before COVID hit, or it might have been during COVID as well. So Landscape of Nations was a group that the museum's partnered with to learn more about the Indigenous collections, and this is part of that James Morton collection that we're working on getting photographed, so that we can, you know, send the photographs out to the world and see what information comes back on these items. And so the project that Landscape of Nations was working on was Empathic Traditions, and it's an online exhibition, and you can see that now. It's been released now, and we're putting that out on social media pretty constantly. And so these are a few of the things from that project, and they've been really beautifully photographed by them and interpreted in a new and really great way. And so I'm going to be drawing from that information during this tour as well. And you might wonder why there's strange blue outlines on this table. This is one of my templates for an exhibit case. So when I have to fill that case, I make sure that the artifacts stay within the confines of those tape lines. So that's a museum secret. In 1928, Canadian Niagara Power opened a center in Fort Erie that carried things like this, electrical appliances. So that was a new technology that was becoming available to people. And so they had the center that would promote all of the different appliances that you could now have in your home, and they would teach you how to use them. They carried things from all different suppliers, and so they even had a dietitian on site who could teach you different recipes and how to actually cook on this thing. So this was bought for Leonard Hexamer and Margaret Fretz around that time period. And this stayed in the family and was used up until 2006. Then it was donated to the museum here for an exhibition on hydroelectricity. Okay, so now it's time to choose some artifacts and take some things out of the collection and take a closer look. So I have a few things in my reproduction Shako hat here for an artifact to draw. If there's anything that you would like to see in the future, put those in the comment section, and I'll put those items into the hat for our next draw. So number one, we have Sydney Barnett's Egyptian catalog. Number two, Memorial School film. Wood splint basket. And interview with Fred Bruning. Okay, so I'll look up those artifacts, figure out where to find them, and we'll meet back and take a look. Here we have a rectangular basket with a lid. It's woven from wooden splints and decorated with yellow, red, and blue dye. Alternating splints are washed in yellow, and a checkered pattern of what appears to be leaves or flowers is stamped in red and dark blue. One side has a sparseness of decoration. So this year we learned more about this basket through the Empathic Traditions project, when the museums partnered with Landscape of Nations 360 to create an online exhibit of Indigenous objects and the artifact collection interpreted by the Indigenous community. The exhibition can be found at www.empathictraditions.ca. Our previous description assigned by the museum was simply a physical description and a statement of history unknown, which is never good. Through Empathic Traditions, we can now say, the original Indigenous peoples of the Niagara region had to fashion all of their tools, utensils, clothing, and household goods from what nature provided. This basket, well from the late 19th century, still shows an ingenious way of decorating a basket. Designs were carved into a potato, which was used to stamp the blue designs on the black ash splints, some of which were also hand-painted and dyed yellow. This traditional storage basket was made more beautiful to the eyes of the user through the use of the designs. Other baskets were made from reed, grasses, and native hemp. At the museum, we also learned from Six Nations artists who partnered to present the education program Discovering Canada that the process of creating a splint basket is quite elaborate. A black ash tree is cut down, the bark is stripped, the length of the log is pounded, causing thick splints to separate from the annual rings, and the splints are made thinner by further splitting with a knife and pulling apart. The splints are smoothed and cut to size and woven into a basket, and dyes can be prepared and used for decoration if desired. You can see a bit of bowing in the lid and the sides, possibly from storage of large items inside or sitting on top of the basket. This is a very delicate object that can easily have its shape distorted by force and humidity. This is a film of Memorial School, which existed from 1922 to 1981 in a building that still exists today. The film was part of a project at the museums in 2019 that had the audio and visual collections converted to digital to help with access and preservation. Stephen Hartwell of homemovies.ca volunteered his time and his equipment, which was a big help. Built on Spring Street, Memorial School was named by its students who felt that it would be an appropriate name to honor the 176th Battalion, the Niagara Rangers, on whose training grounds the school was built, and also for local men who were killed during the First World War. The school was named on December 10th, 1921, and the 8-room schoolhouse was officially opened by Lord Byng, then the Governor General of Canada, on April 22nd, 1922. In 1929, 6 classrooms and an auditorium were also added to the school. A sundial dedicated to 15 former Memorial students who had died in the First World War was unveiled on November 11th, 1946. The school was closed in 1981, and that was as a result of declining enrollment, and the building is now the home of Branch 479 of the Royal Canadian Legion. In this film, you can see students doing exercises and dancing around a maypole. At one point, a turntable is brought out to provide music. However, of course, this is a silent movie, but you can feel free to add your own musical accompaniment in the style of the 1930s. Sidney Barnett was the son of Thomas Barnett, founder of the Old Niagara Falls Museum on River Road, built in 1831. Sidney traveled the world for his father's museum, accumulating artifacts and curiosities as he traveled. The museum was what we call a cabinet of curiosities, featuring geological and historical artifacts from all over the world. For many people, this was the only chance that they could see objects in person if you can't afford to travel. And of course, books at the time only had artist renderings, not photographs. Following Sidney's trip to Egypt to obtain artifacts, the museum featured a section on ancient Egypt, including several mummies, a sarcophagus, and a number of other objects. In 1999, on the sale of the Egyptian collection to the Michael C. Carlos Museum at Emory University in Atlanta, it was discovered that one of the mummies was in fact Pharaoh Ramses I, founder of the 19th dynasty. The museum then repatriated Ramses back to Egypt in 2003, where he now resides at Luxor Museum. A couple of artifacts donated by the Barnett family to the collection here give an indication of Sidney's work as a collector. An 1854 catalog of Dr. Abbott's collection of Egyptian antiquities that reads like a Sears catalog wish list, complete with Sidney's notes and drawings in the margins. There's also a lecture. In November 1862, Sidney wrote a lecture on his time in Egypt. Using Sidney's own words, local performer David Mackenzie reenacted the lecture here at the museum in 2017. Attendees immersed themselves in the ancient treasures of Egypt through the lens of a mid-19th century traveler. One section states, thousands, yes, hundreds of thousands of mummies still remain, notwithstanding the immense number that have been carried away and destroyed, and the traveler will find in some places where antiquarians have been making excavations, piles of mummies thrown out, partly buried by the sand, a grim and awful sight. Having the fortune to meet Ramses I mummy at the Old Niagara Falls Museum and again in Luxor on a trip in 2016, I recognize that for many years, museums have made a business of taking and profiting from other people's cultures, their cultural materials, much of which is now given new perspective, being repatriated or returned to their people, like Ramses I mummy. Here we have one of two audio cassette tape recordings of Fred Bruning Sr. being interviewed by museum worker Emma Chambers in probably the 1980s or 90s. This is another object that was recently digitized for accessibility and preservation. Fred describes his being born, raised, and living his entire life in Stamford and Willoughby townships. He precisely details numerous personalities, families, streets, locations. He talks about life in Old Willoughby Township and its association with surrounding locations such as Niagara Falls, Queenston, Navy Island, Welland, Buffalo, Fort Erie, Tonawanda. He talks about the homes, farms, businesses, infrastructure, and fun stories, all intermingling together. Fred was born in 1907 and lived to be 91 years old. He was a supporter of his community and local history, having donated to the museum and carried on the oral tradition that still continues to be quite strong in this area. He was a member of the fire department and was responsible for placing street signs along Sodom Road in Willoughby. Having recruited daughter Anne to paint the signs, they helped firefighters find their way to addresses quickly. What I like about this interview is that our interviewer and interviewee had fun. In the age of social media, we might have different filters, intentional and unintentional, that show up in our recorded interactions. I know I do. Listening to this reminds me of visiting my grandpa for tea and a chat, or a Sunday drive chatting about what you're seeing and how things have changed. I've chosen some images of the South Niagara River Parkway to accompany this excerpt, where Fred shares memories of Navy Island.
I was born in Stamford Township, the old Howie place, where what do you call it now? What do you call that? A big mall.
Niagara Square.
Huh?
Niagara Square?
The Niagara Square. That was a farm. Where the Niagara Square is now. That was the farm that we lived. That's where I was born, raised till I was 7 years old. Then we moved up the river to the Wright place. And my dad and Uncle Louis rented that, and it was a big farm. It was 350 acres, and Uncle Louis worked the one half of it. My dad worked the other, and they worked together. And the Snyders, Joe Snyder family lived in that house, and Uncle Louis had the barn, and then that's the way they worked it out. Then they made hay together, and made wood, raised cattle, horses, and then they used to take some of the cattle over to Navy Island for pasture, young stock and that.
How'd they get them over there?
Well, Dick Snyder had a motorboat. One of them old fellows with a one-cylinder engine, and
Brave souls.
they borrowed a scow, and it was at the time when the hydro was just starting. There was no hydro or anything up there then, no telephones or anything, and but they had a scow, and it was a small one. Well, it would probably hold an automobile nicely, something like that. Well, they took the thrashing machine over there with it. The engine, they have to take it separate. The engine, the steam engine, they take that over on there. Then they'd have to come back and get the grain separator. And one year they went over there twice to thrash. The farmer lived over there, and he had a family. Well, it was 10 in the family, and he, the boy was just not too much older than I. He was about 2 years older than I, young George.
So thanks for joining the tour. If there's anything else that you would like to see, I hope you enjoyed what you saw tonight, but if I missed anything, or if you have favorites in the collection that you found in our online database, if there are other areas of the museum that you're interested in, or the other museums that we operate, then drop us a line and let us know what you'd like to see. And I look forward to visiting with you again and sharing more of the history. And I also look forward to hearing from you, and especially if you have your own stories about some of these artifacts that you see, if you have personal connections to them, or you have similar things, please post that on our social media. And I'm always looking for information to add to our files, so things that can enrich those stories. Always looking for that, and that's why we do this, so that we can all learn together. So thanks again. Good night.